Para pa 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 pa. Pa para pa para pa para claque bom. Para pa 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 pa. Hey Deus!
No other region of the world knows higher homicide rates than Latin America. But before talking about it, let's abandon the stereotypes. Colonization, conquest, guerrilla movements and civil wars, bloody revolutions and brutal dictatorships. Violence is a persistent feature of Latin American history. In the 1980s, limits on state violence were established in a special relationship of the elites and internal security forces, usually under the control of the military. In the 90s, zero-tolerance policies, also known as mano dura, were implemented. These anti-gang programs extended the scope of police powers, increased the severity of sentences, and unleashed massive police operations. As a consequence of hardline drug policies, infamous gangs such as Comando Vermelho did not disappear. On the contrary, they became more powerful. They engaged with drug cartels and challenged the state. Meanwhile, the state's transition to democracy was marked with a patronage system, instilling corruption and mistrust among government officials. The accumulation of inflated states with absent or violent security forces crumbled the legitimacy of Latin American countries to deal with violence. Beyond politics, a variety of social and economic factors influenced this issue. To help me out, I interviewed Donald Kingsbury, a professor at the University of Toronto in the Department of Political Science and a specialist in Venezuelan politics.
I think that one of the things that we've seen in cities that throughout the region that have high rates of violent crime is you also have histories within the last two generations of pretty violent social upheaval, massive and unplanned rural-to-urban immigration. Just materially speaking, there's a situation of lack and lack both in terms of basic services and maybe basic 3 square meals a day sort of thing, but also lack of a sort of cohesive social identity or trust in the sorts of institutions of urban life.
It is a complicated and massively diverse region. Therefore, I chose to focus on the city of Caracas, Venezuela, which is currently the most violent city in the world. Last year, it recorded 48 homicides per 100,000 people. This is 8 times higher than the global average.
By 1992, and the mayor at that time took office and went into the mayor's office and realized that the office of the mayor didn't have any reliable maps of the city. He could look out his window from the mayor's office and see that the city was growing at a sort of breakneck and unplanned pace all around him, but he had no numbers, no basic information on the people, let alone the needs of the largest city in the country.
One of the origins of homicidal violence in Caracas might be attributed to the unplanned and accelerated growth caused by the oil boom in the 20th century. The precarious communities in Caracas, called barrios in Spanish, grew 6 times more than the formal city. Spatially, the density encouraged violence and crime because it inhibited access to basic services such as the collection of sewage and the distribution of water. Also, it created major barriers for the establishment of security forces.
We're dealing in situations where urban planning, when it does exist, is usually after the fact. So we tend to associate them with particular areas and with particular people who live in slums or favelas or barrios or ranchos or whatever you want to call them. It ignores some of the larger, harder to identify and harder but absolutely necessary to respond to structural violences that have to do with inequality, that have to do with poverty, that have to do with lack of opportunity, all of which are also located in slums, favelas, barrios, ranchos, precarious communities because of their lack of legal title, because of their lack of clear jurisdiction, because of their lack of services, and because of the often transient nature of populations in these areas.
As in Caracas, violent Latin American cities have voids of state presence. In its place, an informal economy sprawls, generating a culture of uncertainty and crime.
But I do think self-organization is key here, because building communities from the ground up is what is necessary. But again, that's a generational process.
I propose the creation of an organization that funds successful youth-focused NGOs located in the most violent regions in Latin American cities. Based on the model proposed by Professor Kirk Bowman, this organization will provide annual funds for 5 years to these NGOs. It contacts NGOs but requires an application to be filled indicating the purpose of the request for funds. Alongside the money provided, logistical support will be offered in locus in order to improve the NGO's outcomes. The logistical support will be a mixture of set standards and tailored needs. These standards would be based upon the basic needs for an NGO to increase its outreach, including a feedback system, financial advising, structuring of educational outcomes, and branding.
The solution is viable because it works with pre-existing structures, it develops ideas that are already working and in place, and it's culturally adaptable, as devised by local experts. Also, it is easy to track the funds. However, the question remains, what should be done next?